alongside chants of build the wall, or pastors praising God for sending Donald Trump to the country to make us great again. The White Man's Burden, a poem and an idea that white people needed to uplift the poor, inferior races, was considered a religious duty. Professional athletes taking a prayerful posture, kneeling, during the national anthem were and are attacked as ungrateful ignoramuses. Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement to this day rings true that Sunday mornings are the most segregated time in America. Racism and religion unfortunately go hand in hand, if not in practice, then surely in conversation. And so, welcome back to Unfolding Wings, that great, holy podcast addressing issues and topics important to young adults so that they might unfold their wings and grow into the faithful people we are all called to be. This time, we're talking about racism because that's definitely important to many young adults and also because it's time for some controversy on this podcast. My young adult co hosts are just so happy to be here and to be put on the spot and potentially say something that a whole lot of folk will take offense at. So say hi, Kayla and Diego.
Hello.
Hola.
All right. Great. It is so good to have you guys as always. But first of all, let me say that anyone who has been listening to this podcast from the beginning might have noticed that I've kind of dropped the act and the character of the holy pastor, which is supposed to be a stereotypical, funny, conservative guy. I've kind of dropped that act because it was hard. I'm not a good actor, but it's good for me because otherwise my character today would have had to also praise Donald Trump for being the savior of America, and I just personally can't do that. Won't do that. And look, to be clear, I only mentioned Trump because my character would have, and I'm just explaining that I'm no longer in character. And ultimately, I personally want us to realize that no politician of any party can be a savior to us or to our country. But I don't want us to be upset or get into a battle about who we like and who we don't, because that's not the point of the conversation. And I don't intend to offend. As faithful people, we do, of course, need to look at our leaders and ourselves by God's light. But all I mean to say with that Trump comment is that I'm no longer trying to play a character, and that no one but God, Jesus, is a savior. And this is as good a time as any to say our disclaimer that this episode does not necessarily reflect our own views or those of the church. We are creating an open space for young adults to safely explore. Secondly, before we say anything, let me try to explain what racism actually means. Racism refers to systems of injustice that keep people down, and that's different from prejudice and bias. If you're an employer looking at the resumes of two kids out of high school, say, and you choose to hire the white kid simply because they're white and the other is black, that's prejudice. However, if you choose the white kid because you see that she went to a nice private school and must therefore be well educated, and the black kid went to some crap school, that's likely racism. It's likely racism because of the history of redlining, and let's not forget, black families are still only about 4 generations removed from slavery and literally having nothing to start with. So, bias and prejudice are the ideas that you in your heart and mind just don't like certain people, and racism is the acceptance or the promotion of inequitable and unjust systems. So, are you guys familiar with this concept of racism as I've just explained it?
Yes, more that I want to.
More than you want to. Okay, yeah. So, does that question spark anything more than a yes? Any comment?
I mean, the concept of I think it of racism as the way you describe it, I think it's not used widely in like the general population, I guess. So when people don't see, um, lynching anymore, they're like, well, racism is gone. So I think that people don't really understand what racism means, what are the outcomes of it, what are the ramifications, and what really means to say like let's fight racism. Um, a lot of education needs to go into that, I think, for everybody.
Yeah, and so our listeners, of course, won't be able to see your faces, but I could tell on your faces when I asked that question that uh, you're you. It seems like you want to say as little as possible throughout this episode, so you offend as few people as possible. But um, so yeah, I think you're right, Diego, that uh, the what racism actually means is not as widely understood as we would like. And I like to point out to Dr. Robin DiAngelo, um, who is one of the most infamous, I guess, writers about racism and white privilege. And she spends a lot of time making the distinction between being a bad person and being a racist. And she says you can be a good person and also a racist at the same time. And that's a concept that for a lot of people doesn't make any sense, because if you think you're a good person, then that means you can't be racist. But she points out that, like, one of my aunts uh, was saying some racist things in support of Donald Trump back in 2016, and tried pointing that out to her. And she said, well, no, I'm a nice person, so I can't be racist. But that's simply not true. She probably is very nice one on one with Black people and everybody. In fact, I know she is. Uh, but she was supporting systems of racism. So it is very important that people get this distinction.
Mhm.
Um, I can keep on talking about a story I have in my days in Vermont, but do you want to stop me for a second, or should I just keep saying the stuff and putting myself on the spot?
No, I mean,
I
yeah.
mean, go ahead, Diego.
No. Like, going back to like, like I feel like when you talk about racism, going back to comment, no offending anybody, I think that if I'm talking about racism or racist people, and you get offended, well, you might be racist. But the biggest thing with me when I talk about this is just trying to get away from like what a lot of people do in different type of mediums, especially towards like younger generation or liberals or minorities, which is like the strawman concept, which I will put a concept of what I consider to be older generation or people that happen to not look like me, and then put all these things that are easily to be able to could be called them racist, right? Like easily, like all these factors that can easily be like, well, you're from this generation, you're older, and you voted for Trump, for you're racist, and there's nothing else. So it's kind of hard, I guess, like this type of conversation, having it without somebody that has ideas that we might see as racist, or that might have different ideas and to come to a conclusion of racism or not. So that's why I'm trying to like word my make put my words in the right way, because I don't want to just assume somebody's that way or not. Like, for example, yesterday a younger woman, and by younger woman somebody in undergrad, me and my sister and a friend went to go have a beer, and this younger woman's an undergrad right behind us, like, oh, I didn't know this is a brewery, oh, I didn't know there would be so many Mexicans in here, and like a very bad tone. And this is a younger person that dressed like a Gen Zer, that, it wasn't like she was wearing like, what we would think or whatever, like a support Trump kind of thing. So I think that's like like those type of thinkings, or what people might say, what people, things like that are everywhere.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I had to again translate that you did not go out for beer, you went out for some soda pop. Because this is
Root beer, sorry,
oh,
I
okay,
got cut
okay.
off there.
Gotcha. But yeah, good point. I mean, and I've mentioned Trump a number of times, and as you did as well just then, because I think most people can agree that he is racist as well as biased. However, among our listeners, there will be many Trump supporters, and we don't want to throw them all into the same basket. So it is very difficult because as soon as we say something about the person Donald Trump, there are going to be a lot of people who might not be racist, who just instantly turn off. So yeah, this is a difficult conversation for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, like, it's so hard because I wanna frame and phrase things correctly and not just like throw people under the bus and make assumptions. I obviously found it, just like a lot of us, really hard, especially after when Trump was running for election. It's hard, like, because you were saying, like, you can be a good person and be racist, and for my little brain to wrap my mind around that is impossible. It's really hard for me to think that way. Um, just because of the way that it affects people, like, and it hurts me to say this because I have family that is like that, right? Like, okay, yeah, that I have family that supported Trump, and they also were like, we stand with Black Lives Matter, which is like crazy to me, but they exist, you know? So it's just like, and then you have like Latinos for Trump. Like, it's the craziest things are out there, and that's why it's just so hard because this is a really hard subject to talk about. This is a really hard subject to talk about because it's still so relevant, even if people don't think so. I mean, this is happening every day, and I feel like people get so caught up in other things that we lose focus in something that's really important to so many people.
Yeah, and and that, well, I was going to say that's perhaps a case of people doing things that don't actually or aren't actually good for themselves, like Latinos for Trump, but that's debatable, I suppose. But certainly for a lot of people, this conversation was reignited as a conversation we needed to have because of Donald Trump.
Mm.
Uh, and that's why I am mentioning him. And certainly it's why back in Vermont, where I was a pastor before coming here to Massachusetts, it was during the election cycle and shortly thereafter that I sometimes held workshops and information nights on racism. And members of my congregation, usually they either didn't show up or they asked, why is this our problem? We live in Vermont. And if you don't know, Vermont is the whitest state in the country. It's something like 3% of its residents are non-white.
Yeah,
I
it's
saw two
crazy, right?
people. Yeah, in my 7 years there, I saw two families who were black. Um, it's also the least religious state in the country, but I am sure that those two things are not related. So these church members, they would go on to say that if they had black neighbors who felt oppressed, they would talk about racism. But because they don't have black neighbors, why bother? It's Vermont. And so again, there's a distinction between prejudice and racism. Funnily enough, that church did have one of the two black people that I saw in my time in Vermont. And the congregation I never thought that they were at all biased or racist towards him. They were just as nice and friendly to him, not in a way that, they were trying very hard not to be biased. They just included him, right? So they weren't prejudiced. But for me, the question was, did anyone ever consider why Vermont is as white as it is? It's not just because it's cold and black people don't like the cold. If that were the reason, then we would be prejudiced for thinking that. But it has a lot to do with how extremely expensive it is to move to and live in Vermont, among other things. The system in Vermont does not support people who might not have a whole lot of money. And I'm not saying that black people don't have money, but in general, uh, it is true they are less wealthy. So for the very reason that they thought they didn't need to talk about racism, they absolutely did need to because of the meaning of racism. The system that they lived in was making it very hard for their communities to become diverse. So let's talk about why it matters to you. Um, the first book study that we did as the young adult Bible study while I was the pastor here was Angie Thomas's The Hate You Gave, which is a great novel. But why does it matter to you and other young adults that we talk about racism?
I mean, we're Christians. This should matter, right? There's people that are oppressed. We should care. There's people that are in need. We should care. I mean, like I think one of the big things that I hear, especially like surrounding like the Black community or people of color, is people are always making assumptions or just like not being fair as to why a lot of people end up doing criminal activity or like, and it's just like, okay, but we as a society have pushed them into this way of living because it's so hard to, I guess, like, I don't know the best phrasing for this, but like make their way up the ladder, because they're starting at a different level than a lot of other people are. You can bring in white prejudice to this because I feel like a lot of white people are just like, I had it hard too growing up, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, okay, you did that. We're not saying that you didn't have it hard growing up. We're saying that you didn't have it hard growing up only based on your skin color. There's the skin color plays a huge part of this. You had a hard childhood, and that is that's fair. Like I understand that. A lot of people do. But it's just the thing that didn't affect it was the color of your skin. And I think that people just like want to wipe that away. And sometimes that's the same people that are just like, I don't see color. And that's also like, I really hate that phrase, right? Because it's like, but my color or anybody else's color, this is what makes us who we are too. Like I take pride in the color of my skin. I know a lot of other people do. So it's just like I want people to see color. I mean, color is what makes us beautiful. Whether you're black, white, brown, whatever, everybody's beautiful, but it's just like I think that we need to be accountable to ourselves. Like, okay, did my skin color help me or did it didn't? And it's okay to be like, yeah, it did. You don't have to be ashamed. Like, I don't know why lighter skinned people are so like pressed to try to be like in the suppressed group. And I'm just like, you have it good. It's okay, but that doesn't mean you have to like try to make it about you all the time.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Kayla's saying. I think, like with racism, like especially in the United States, everything is a lot of like stratification of like goods, right? Like, so, one group will always try to be a little bit above and not try to get that spot of whatever they are taken from another group that might be coming in, right? And that comes all the way from what we were talking about, like Latinos for Trump. And I know it's like a hard concept of people like if you voted for Trump, it might be racist. Yes, because you are putting he's putting stuff that is kind of benefits one group over the other, and then those Latinos for Trump, they see that their group get benefit and they don't care about the other group because they want to keep that spot. And even Latinos, I mean, we have racism in Latinos. We have racism in my country, in Peru. I have experienced racism in Peru. I come from, why is that important? I think because a lot of people are like always like, well, why is always first race with you? Why you always gotta bring race with you, Diego? Why you always gotta bring race in? I was like, well, I mean, it's been kind of like the topic of my conversation of everything who I am since I was a kid. My grandmother was black, my grandfather was white. They were seen as a interracial couple, and then my dad is very dark. My mom is very light skinned. She's half Chinese, half Peruvian, Spaniard. Like, so they were also looked up as interracial couple. There was also a lot of racism, animosity in the families between them too. And obviously right now I'm an interracial couple too. So it matters to me because there is racism. My kids are going to feel it as an interracial couple. Like me and Alita has witnessed a lot of things that sometimes are said or, different of experiences when we go into different places. So that's why it's important, because it's everyday life. It's sucks that I see a kid that might be treated badly just because how he looks like. So that's why it's important, because it's not just racism, it's just all the types of discrimination that are happening that shouldn't exist, but they do exist. There's just nothing new. It's always been there.
Yeah, so that's a good point that racism is everywhere. It's not just white people against darker skinned people. It can be within countries that we think of as um, or that are darker skinned people, but as well as they just within the Black community, there's racism. Yes. So Kayla just um, made a note to me of colorism, which is exactly what I was about to say. That colorism is the word coined for racism within the Black community that lifted up lighter skin Black people and kept down the darker skin Black people, that you wanted to be as white as possible. And I remember the Malcolm X's autobiography. Um, uh, One of the more poignant stories to me was how he and others would get rid of their afro through a very painful process, because they wanted to look as white as possible. Um, so it's not just white, Black, but as Kayla said, it's part of who we are. Like, we can't help it, what color we are. We can't help what culture or country we're born into, any more than we can help um, what color we are. So we want to make sure that people aren't oppressed or treated differently simply for something that they can't control. Um, and so I'm circled back to something Kayla said of, we should care because people are oppressed. And I think one question that people will have, well, is are they? Um, in general, I think people would be able to very easily accept that there are some people who are born into really difficult circumstances, but like LeBron James or Colin Kaepernick, um, are they oppressed? I mean, can we really say that just with the sweep of that brush that that a whole people is oppressed? Can we say that?
So the whole Colin Kaepernick thing, the thing I want to bring up first with that is if it had been a white man to do that, I think that it would have been a different story. But because it was a black man, people were so eager to throw him under the bus and make it like a really big, like, oh, this is terrible. Like, this is sports. I also hate that comment. Really. Like, this is sports. Keep your politics and beliefs out of it, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, all right, these are real people too. I don't want to go on a rant about that, but that's just like my little 2 cents on that. Like, let's change the narrative because if it was a white guy that did it, it would have been different. Maybe it wouldn't have been so different, but it definitely would have been. The tones and the people and the way that people spoke about him, I think it would have been different. So I mean, wealth, that's a different story, right? Because you can still be black and oppressed and wealthy, but do they have privilege? Sure, because they're wealthy. What was the other thing that I wanted to say? Diego, if you wanted to throw something in right now while I'm trying to remember what I was going to say like 2 minutes ago. I
Yeah,
just didn't
yeah,
want to stop Pastor John's little
yeah.
monologue.
No, 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 no. Yeah, it's crazy because people always bring things like people that are famous, right? Like, well, what about Colin Kaepernick? What about no, just like, well, what about this other Hispanic person? What about Oprah? I was the only one Oprah. There's only one, Colin Kaepernick. Also, like, you don't you have to look also in their past, like what did they go through as children just because of the color of the skin. Now, Colin Kaepernick, right? His parents are white. I don't know if they were wealthy. The same thing with, he's adopted, and the same thing with I have no idea what how other football players or artists or basketball players what they're, if they have to be black and how they grew up. But no matter, even if you have parents that don't look like you're still gonna go through things that only a black person, only a Hispanic person, only an Asian person are gonna go through. Just like women are gonna go through only things that women are going through, like they're gonna be mansplained, they're gonna be they could get sexually harassed. Obviously men can, but obviously percentage wise, it's a lot more happen women. So we can't take that away, that even if they're rich now, whatever happened in their youth, whatever happened as children, whatever happens when people don't recognize them, you know and like Kayla said, how everybody treated Colin Kaepernick because maybe of his color of his skin. But yeah, I think that one of the biggest things with racism people don't understand is that if you look at health wise, like like minorities have like a tremendous disparity when it comes not just to how to get access to healthcare, but also why are this minorities having more disease, or what having more of this mental health problems, and that's all due to these things called ACE, which is kind of like what happens when you're a kid. So all these things that happen when you're a kid, or all these things that might happen because of where you live, might be it does kind of make you more unhealthy as you get older. You have more risks of being unhealthy as you get older. And this is also this thing about PTSD becoming as a chronic PTSD of not just one event, but multiple small events in your life, creating this kind of problem in your brain, with creating this type of trauma in your brain. So when people try to not hear I hear a lot of we shouldn't teach about what's that called,
Critical race theory.
critical race theory, and we shouldn't do this. And I'm like, why not learn about things? And people think that younger folks are getting indoctrinized. I can't pronounce, sorry, my dyslexia is kicking in. And I'm like, were you really dumb when you were a child? Is that why you think that kids can't think for themselves? Were you a really dumb person as a kid? Because I remember as a kid, I could make my own choices, but it is happening. In Westboro just now, there's a group of white men that have a very anti-Semitic website that people have found, and they're really trying to stop any books that are LGBTQ plus, any books that are black, black history books, or any kind of racial any kind of history. And it's so so crazy to me to hear those kind of things about racism, and trying to stay away from getting away from from politics, but just how much we want diversity in our churches, how much we want young folk in our churches, but at the same time, how much we want our churches to grow, but at the same time, there's people in the church trying to ignore the fact that this young folk or this diverse people are going through stuff that they don't have to go through, because of the color of the skin, or where they come from, or how they dress, or the type of hair they have, and just the fact they're so kind of backed up, I don't believe that this is happening. That just show you that how much they don't believe other people, don't believe minorities.
You just reminded me what I wanted to say, and then I just lost it again. But you were saying something about how the people don't believe. Okay, so that's the other thing I wanted to say. I think the thing that also surrounding racism when it comes to especially ignorance, right? Because people are ignorant and they don't know what's going on. They don't believe it's a big deal. So when it's brought to their attention, it's uncomfortable, or they're just like, I don't want to talk about that. I'm good. It's not affecting me, right? Because the second it starts affecting people, that's when people start to care. And I think that that's where we fall short, especially within the Christian community. Why do you have to be personally affected by it in order for you to care? And this covers a whole scope of things, not just racism, but obviously our racism right now. So it's just that's the thing that really gets under my skin, especially within the church, is people don't care unless it directly affects. And I think that we need to be better about that.
Yeah, that is so true. So
Mhm.
selfish. People so selfish.
Yeah.
I apologize,
My
Pastor John.
No, it's all good. My editing software is really terrible. I have to go through the whole thing in
I
order to
can,
take out one little word.
if you
So
send me the MP3, I can do it. If you
okay,
send me whatever you send me, I have I can edit that word.
that'll be good. So then we'll edit out the word, and then everyone hearing this conversation will be like, "What? Why do
What
they have to edit
happened?
anything?"
What did
Um, so you guys brought up a lot of great stuff there. I just want to throw out some things. So a couple of books. There's one, The Heritage by Howard Bryant, which is about Black athletes and how horrible it is that essentially the only way out of poverty that we give most Black people is to use their bodies to be objects for entertainment. So that's a great book. There's another one, and I forgot to look up the name of it, but it's about three Puerto Rican brothers from Springfield and the lives that they had. Um, and also the idea that um, you can have PTSD just from having certain lived experiences. You don't need to go to war in order to have it. It's just from constantly living aware that you are a person of color, and statistically and anecdotally, you might be treated differently by police officers. You might be treated differently by other authority figures in school and so forth. And you need to constantly be on guard. That can cause things as well as generational trauma as well. I think I've told my story before on this podcast of my mother vowing not to teach her kids anything about Puerto Rican culture. So I grew up white essentially, but then, um, and to Kayla's point earlier, just to acknowledge the privilege you had. So, as a white person, essentially, I checked off Puerto Rican on all of my college applications, not because I really am, but because, hey, that's going to make me a better college applicant. Um, but that's generational trauma there, right? That means I have not grown up as half of who I could have been, and there's no blame or anything towards my mother. It's just lived reality for a lot of people. So, you know, all of this stuff that you guys brought up, but especially the not believing people and not caring until it actually affects you, I think are all really important things. And that gets us to talking about the church and how we should respond. So, our last episode, we invited an elder of the church to speak with us and provide their point of view. And it was actually pretty great because we realized that the generations, at least from the perspective of the church elder that we had that day, that we agree generationally on more than we thought we might. I did not invite an elder of the church for this episode because I really worried about it. I might have been proven wrong again, and we might have had a coming together moment, and we could have sang Alleluia, praise Jesus together. Uh, I worried though that on this score the gap is it's too wide to have a calm conversation together that could come to any meaningful conclusion in the space of a single episode. Some other time, perhaps. Uh, but since being here, I know that I've heard comments from folk that we don't need to talk about Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. Or, as Kayla mentioned earlier, I also grew up with nothing and I didn't whine and complain. I just worked harder. Or I don't have a racist bone in my body, so I don't owe anyone anything. I didn't enslave anyone, so we should move past this. And one time I preached on the Exodus story and mentioned how for a lot of Black Christians, they consider it their story, the Exodus story. And someone responded with, "That's not their story. Do you know that Italians had it just as bad?" And I, of course, was not trying to say that Italians haven't been hurt and persecuted at various times in history, nor do I mean to say that any of these people who've made these comments are bad, horrible, or even racist, although the last person I think very well probably was. I'm only pointing these things out because we are often emotional when it comes to racism. It doesn't matter what generation you are, it's an emotional topic. And young adults who are equally passionate in fighting racism can feel opposed and put down. As both of you have said, it's as if sometimes people just don't want to listen. And since the point of this show is to give young adults space to explore without judgment, to grow in faith and find a place for themselves, I wanted to provide that space. So, first of all, am I just speaking out of my butt here, or can young adults feel uncomfortable speaking their minds on racism among members of previous generations?
I think it's so true. I think it's the other way around. I mean, I seriously, like, when it comes to my generation, millennials, maybe yes, maybe some young adults do prefer not to talk about it. But when it comes to Gen Zers, I feel like they have a good understanding of what's going on, and they're very eloquent when talking about this. Um, the whole thing stops when either party is not when either party gets frustrated. I think when either party goes, "It's my opinion," and you can't tell me my opinion don't matter. And I'm like, well, it's my opinion, so you can't say that, because then it's such a conundrum. But I think it's the other way around. To tell you the truth, I have no problem telling anybody how I think, but some people might. I mean, some Gen Zers might. It's just, I think it's more of personal, yet not generational. Like, it's more of how, some people don't like confrontation, some people don't like, discussing or talking, or, so, but I think that I have more trouble with not every older generation. I have very good talks with older generations that don't think like me at all, and we have great talks. But yeah, so yeah.
Um, okay, so I'll answer this for the people that don't like confrontation. Um, I'm in between because I love some good confrontation when it's something I'm passionate about. This is one of those things for sure. But I know that there are a lot of people, in my generation that are just like take, my husband Nate. He's not gonna sit there and tell off some elder in the church like you're being racist. But he's not gonna do that, and that's fine. That's fine. I mean, he'll come home and he'll rant and vent about it to me, and he'll be like, "I can't believe blah 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 said that," But for him to go up to somebody and confront them about it, that's probably not gonna happen. I think like the issue that some of us, and I'm speaking only for like people that are raised by the generation before us, it was a little bit different because now you have like this divide with the Gen Zers where it's just like they're being raised by the generation that we're kind of in. So I think that they're just able to think more freely because that's how we're raising them to think, which is awesome. But then like I feel like our generation, we were taught one way, like this is the way that you're supposed to be. And I'm speaking from a Christian point of view. This is the way that you're supposed to grow up and be a Christian. There's only, you got to follow this rule, blah, blah. You can't be gay. Like who cares about these people? Halloween is sinning, whatever. Like anything you can name that's inherently bad in the eyes of like the elderly Christians. That's how we were raised. So then for us to come back and be like, actually, now that I'm self-differentiating from everything you taught me, you're wrong. Like it's hard to have that conversation. And like I've been having a lot of conversations with people in my family, even my parents, even though now in agreement. It's hard to have those conversations, because you got to go back and be like, I want to have a loving conversation, but can we actually have one? Because we're so passionate on the stands that we have. And just as stubborn or as right as we think we are, they feel the same exact way. And it's like it's so hard to find the right words to be like, I just want you to like open your mind and just like really process what I'm trying to say. Because the first thing that I feel like I hear, which you just said again, was they always are like, oh, but I had it bad growing up, or oh, like what you said about the Italians, but the Italians had it bad growing up too. And it's just like, just if we could take a break from thinking that way, right? Because that's not what we're talking about. I'm telling you about an experience that somebody went through, whether it's mine or somebody else's. They're talking about their own experience. Why do you have to automatically make it about yourself? You know? And I just like, and I love elderly people. I mean, like, I can have great conversations because I think they have great stories. They've gone through so much. They've been through different parts in history. The conversation is great just because you have a different standing on things. Like that doesn't mean we have to hate each other. But it's just to find the right words to be on the same ground. It's hard. It's hard, especially because we're so passionate about it. So I think like, is it like if you would have invited an elder on here, would I have been uncomfortable for having this conversation? A little bit. But would I still have been passionate about what I had to say? Yeah, because I want them to know, like, if these people, if they're listening to this right now, I'm hoping that they're coming into this with an open mind. I'm not here to sit and attack people. I just want us to just rethink and reevaluate. Am I thinking the right way? Am I saying the right things? Am I being hurtful in what I'm saying? So,
So both of you have um, mentioned how hard how the difficulty in having the conversation can go both ways. So that perhaps it's difficult for us, although Diego said no. Um, but but personalities being what they are might equally be
Yes.
difficult for someone in an older generation, and I can understand, especially if um, they see themselves in any of what we're talking about. They might feel attacked and targeted and might not want to speak up because then doing so might label them as racist. So that makes sense. And I think for me, and just looking at the time, there are a couple of other questions I wanted to ask us, but we might not really get to, although we've kind of covered them. But for me, I think one of the major things we've kind of said without necessarily saying it is just the need to listen to one another, generation to generation. Mostly we've said to listen to minorities who have these experiences and want to teach us about what racism looks like in lived reality, but also to listen to older generations as well, the difficulties that they have in addressing the issue. That's important as well. And as a pastor, I think that's just really important for us generally, whether it's racism or anything else. That I don't care if you disagree with me, but sit with me in the space where we can talk to one another and and have a conversation, so that we can both be passionate and not hate one another at the end of it. Um, because because it does feel sometimes, even for me, that when I'm preaching, that people aren't listening to the word of God that I might be sharing. They're listening to see if they can judge anything that I say up there at the pulpit. And when I feel like that, that's a real shame, especially when it comes true. um, but but we want people to listen to the the word and the grace of God that's being shared in whatever we're saying, not
Mhm.
the thing that they can hop on in judgment and attack.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we're coming to the end of our time here. I was going to ask, what's the connection for you uh, between faith and the church and racism? Um, Kayla especially kind of talked about that. And hey, if we're a Christian, we kind of need to care if people are oppressed. And the prophet Amos, as well as a bunch of others, say that very clearly. God does not want your sacrifices. God does not want your faith, your worship. If you are worshiping God and making your sacrifices while there are oppressed people around you, so you need to make sure that there are no oppressed people around before you go worship, which is essentially what Amos says. Um, in the New Testament as well, Jesus says, "Look, if your brother or sister has anything against you, go fix that before you do anything else." Um, uh, so what was the next question I was going to ask? The next question I was going to ask was, any final things that you want our elders to hear from you and your generation about race and racism in our country? And I think we talked about, like, don't say I had it hard too, because it's not about you, it's about the thing that people are trying to share, and to see color, right? I think the one thing I would have added to what Kayla said about that was, um, it's not just what makes us beautiful, but it um, I would have told a story actually. So because we're running out of time, let me not tell that story. So I will just say, see color. It's a good thing. Go backwards in the episode to hear the conversation about that. Um, I was also going to ask, what do you think the church's responsibility is to combating racism? Um, so with those three questions in mind, in 60 seconds or less, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we end this episode?
You want me to go first, Kayla? All right. So first of all, like I say, don't be selfish. It's not about you. But second of all, it's okay that you were not right once. I wasn't right once. I wasn't born with all this knowledge or try to, maybe I had some racist tendencies, some racist things that I say as a teenager. I've been learning and I still learn till now. So it's okay. Like we all start in one plate. It's okay to open your mind. It's okay to be wrong. And also, yeah, that I mean, we we have to consider ourselves Christians and realize how the tremendous like pain that we have caused interracial couples by forbidding it, or to also natives in the Americas by forcing religion and murdering because of religion. So because of that, we have to do something to make it better, to kind of go against the tide that we created. That tide that we created in the beginning, that still we feel it to now.
I'm pretty sure that was 60 seconds or less. So great job. Very impressive. I couldn't have done
Woo!
that. Uh, I'll start the clock on you, Kayla.
Oh my God. Okay. Okay, so one thing that's always stuck with me when it comes to issues in the church, is that from non-Christians is they love to say there's no hate like Christian love. That hurts. So maybe we should like think about that and how can we fix that, right? How can we get other people to want to come to church, to want to be with us when they're out here thinking that we're racist, we're prejudiced, we're discriminatory. We don't want to think that way. My other thing is like maybe this is a little bit controversial, right? But let's take a break on human sexuality, right? Because that's clearly it's not getting resolved anytime soon within our church. Let's focus on racism a little bit because this has been a huge deal for a really long time. And the other thing I wanted to say is like we want to talk about these things and we want to hope that we're all coming into this open-minded. We like Diego said, we all start somewhere. We've all been in the same thinking, point that maybe the elderly or whoever else in the church maybe agrees with. We've all been there. And it's okay to feel like you made a mistake or that you thought the wrong way. It's okay to change. So I think that it's okay to change.
Right. Great. Well, I am first of all sorry that I was not paying close enough attention to the time uh, early on in the episode, so we didn't get to things. But we have said before that possibly we need to come back to some of these topics that we've done. This is certainly one of those, especially because I'm sure we have not done nearly enough to change the world. But hopefully, we've spoken our hearts and minds, not just for ourselves, but for anyone listening as well, because that's key for us. Our little niche that we're trying to make is to give young adults seeking God the space to explore questions and issues that may be important to them, the space that they might not otherwise have, to make sure that they know it's okay to be thinking and saying these things and wrestling with these questions. We don't want anyone pushed out or crushed out of because other people are telling them they can't be faithful in the way that they want to be. So hopefully we've at least made room. Next time we'll definitely have an elder with us as we ask the question, is Jesus the only way to salvation? So tell your friends about the podcast so we can all make room for one another as we tackle another controversial topic. And so, co-host, you've done a wonderful job today. Say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Also, I just realized how hard it's for like Miss Universe to answer questions 60 seconds. They get asked like Affordable Health Care Act, national debt, and they have to come with an answer 60 seconds. And that was so hard.
Yeah.
Just props to those women.
A great way to end this episode. Yes, prompts to the Miss America women, and anyone else who has to answer a
Any
question in 60
pageant,
seconds or
could-
less.
yeah, and anybody in a pageant.
Yeah. So until next time, keep it holy, friends.